This is Saiyan here coming at you with the top 10 splashable warriors list in Dragon Ball CCG. So first let's look at our criteria for this particular list. We want the chi requirement to be color free, so we can splash it obviously to any color deck. We want a standalone card design, so we don't want the card to rely on other cards to be functional. And because cards, well, specifically warriors, from and above turn cost of 5 always have a chi cost. We are looking at turn cost between 0 to 4, again, to make them free to play, so we don't have to rely on a particular color chi to be in the deck. And I'll also just want to mention that all the cards mentioned here are excellent draft material. If you guys ever decide to build a little cube draft, then these are perfect picks for that. So let's start with our top 10. We have set 5 Yajirobe. This card is great. The reason why it doesn't really make it into many decks is because if you look at it on the surface, well, it's an Earth card. If you don't like to run Earth, then you don't necessarily think of Yajirobe as an option to run in any other decks. But actually, we have absolutely no obligations to run this card in an Earth deck. So let's look at it. It's a turn 1 cost, without any chi cost. It's a human and male. And we get backup, which of course is the staple effect of set 5. And during the action step, you may deploy this warrior card from your hand and put it into your battling teams in any position. In that case, return this warrior to their hand at the end of the turn if it is in healthy status. This effect can only be used. This effect can be used even if you already deployed this turn. So what basically Yajirobe does is he just jumps in the ring. If you arrange your team in the organization step, then you can really benefit from just putting out Yajirobe, because it allows you to put him into any position. He can take over the lead warrior position in that team. And then, if he's still in healthy status, then you pick him up back in your hand, and next turn you can do that again. Why is this really good? Well, this is basically, it's probably not going to be a +4, but it certainly can be a +2, +3 if you got like a 2 attacker warrior on the front, but it's like a 2/2. Actually, it will potentially become a +4, so you really need to arrange your team in a proper way. Yajirobe jumps out, you basically get a +4. Brilliant card. Our number 9 is Ghost Snapper. We call him Ghost Snapper because he's got backup, so every time he dies, you can just bring him back out again, just like in Abridged. This card, very similar to Yajirobe, is from set 5. The design is similar as well because it's a 1 cost. Slightly different stats. It's a 4010, but it's got a really good effect when it comes into play. It puts a -1/-1 coin on target warrior opponent controls with a turn cost of 1 or less. That's going to be useful for many turns, even after turn 1. If your opponent has a turn 0 or a turn 1 that's in play, if your opponent doesn't hit their curve and they have to play a warrior with a lower turn cost to what they're sitting on at that point in time, you can benefit from this Snapper a lot. And again, that backup ability makes this card super good. Splashable? Absolutely. The main splash I can see Nappa is, of course, either just a pure Saiyan deck where you're running Super, but then you may be probably going to make that Super an alien as well. But he can be really good in any color, realistically, with that effect on the card. Our number 8 is actually 2 cards. So we have King Kai from set 1 and we have East Kai from set 3. If you look at these 2 cards, they are basically the same. The only difference being is that King Kai, when it's moved to your chi area due to its valid action effect, it will give +2/+0, whereas East Kai will give +0/+2. Admittedly, East Kai is not as good as King Kai, but if you don't have access to a King Kai, an East Kai can be a brilliant substitute to still get pretty much the same effect. The only thing you got to be careful with is that you actually have a team where you do have at least one support warrior. So you will need a team of 2 warriors and E-Sky. So probably E-Sky is going to be realistically live from turn 2 onwards to be able to benefit from that brilliant effect. So yeah, not only splashable in any decks, again, we have no specific requirements for these 2 cards, but we can benefit quite nice from the valid action effects. Number 7, Set 5 Chaozu. Now this one is an interesting card. This is the first card we see on this list that has that can provide either a super or an earth chi if it's in our chi pool. It also has backup. It's got a bunch of character traits, so human, hermit style, male, master Shan style. Not that master Shan style matters a lot, but human can, hermit style can, and male can as well. So again, backup, and it's a brilliant support warrior with that 1302 stats line that we have here. But what Chaozu really shines at is you basically get the ability to do some nice damage with this little warrior. The reason why that effect is valid is of course because you want to use this once Chaozu has already been injured. Chaozu is on injured status, you don't mind losing that 2 support value. You can move this card to your discard area. In that case, give 1 damage to target warrior opponent controls with a turn cost of 3 or less. It's just good. I mean, you look at the set 1 Kamehameha, that pretty much does that, but it costs you 3 chi or something like that. So Chaozu, brilliant character. Absolutely worthwhile the splash. Number 6, of course, will be a well-known card, Old Kai. I pretty much have Old Kai in every deck I build. And again, the reason for that being is that effect on Old Kai, strategy valid, doesn't cost you anything. And by the way, with these effects, guys, you can always only use them once per turn. But with Old Kai, for example, it doesn't specify that you need to use it when you're the attacker or when you're the defender, meaning that you can use these both during your and your opponent's strategy phase. So you get to use this effect once per turn, not just yours but your opponent's. And you can put target card in your discard area on the bottom of your planet. This is just amazing. The only reason why he doesn't make it higher up on the list is because indeed he's a really good utility card, but there are more powerful effects in this game. But what this effect means for us is that we can actually take a stand against fierce decks that would be looking at milling our deck. And often, if we end up charging a particular card into our chi, we can use that chi to pay the cost of a particular effect, or pay for an event, or pay for a technique, put it in our discard pile, and then with Old Kai we can recycle it back into our deck. So if we have cards that we specifically want to search out, like Arm Stretch, or if you run King Cold but you only run 1 Freezer to search out with it, then you can recycle that Freezer back into, now your King Cold is able to search again. Similar for Yamcha. If you want to put a particular female warrior back in your deck, you can do that with Old Kai, and etc, etc. So Old Kai becomes basically pretty much an imperative card for any deck. And just because it's a zero turn cost, sorry, that 0-2 is really good. Don't think about Old Kai as your turn 0 play. Think about Old Kai as your turn 1 or perhaps turn 2 play. So you could run like 6 to 8 0-3 attackers as your turn 0 warriors, and think about Old Kai as your turn 1 or turn 2 deploy. It's that simple. Top 5. We actually have 2 cards here, 2 cards from Bojack's gang. Zangia and Bujin. They are both fantastic cards in their own rights. They're absolutely brilliant in the Bojack's gang deck, but they are also very powerful standalone cards. You don't need to have any other Bojack's gang warriors for these cards specifically to be able to use their effects. So let's look at Zangia. Zangia is a 3 turn cost female and Bojack's gang, backup and fierce one, brilliant, already very good effects. But then on top of that we get opposing male warriors get +0, -1. So all male warriors, which is very likely that you're going to run into a few male warriors, will get that -1 support value effect. And when a Bojack's gang warrior you control becomes the user of a technique card, target Bojack's gang warrior in this warrior's team gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. Well, guess what? Zangief is a Bojack's gang warrior, so she can actually target herself with this effect, and every time she uses a technique, she can give herself +1/+1 until the end of the turn. And this is an absolutely fantastic continuous effect. There is nothing stopping it, and you get it till the end of the turn. So even if you have techniques you want to play in your strategy phase and you're thinking, how could I benefit from this the best? Zangief. Zangief is always going to get that +1/+1. Admittedly, it's not a valid effect, probably for the better. It's still very, very powerful, borderline broken even. But you know, if you got like cards that you want to play out just to get some search effect, like a strategy session, for example, you do it in your strategy phase, play with Zangief. Then you go to the battle phase, Zangief is a 5/3 now. Let's look at Bujin. Bujin is a turn 2 play. It comes down with still very solid stats line. Again, has backup. And it has 2 non-valid effects. The first one is when an opposing warrior becomes the user of a reinforcement technique, that warrior gets -1/-1 until the end of the turn. Again, there's no restrictions on this, so anytime and every time this happens, this ability, this effect even, is going to activate. You just have to make sure you got Bujin in play. Every time your opponent plays a technique, you gotta ask them, is that a reinforcement? And if Bujin has a Dragon Ball on it, at start of your turn, you may move a technique or event card from your opponent's chi area to their discard area. This is amazing. Taxing chi is always a very good way to restrict your opponent from playing cards. Mind you, Bujin does need a Dragon Ball. It's not a massive requirement, but it is a powerful effect, so it makes sense that Bandai America decided to kind of cap that effect with the requirement for a Dragon Ball. Nevertheless, 2 very powerful cards. You can use them in their own right. They don't have to be in Bojack's gang. They don't have to be in Villain or Alien. You can play them without any real issues. Number 4, we have Tien. Tien is another fantastic card. Turn 4 card, very powerful stats, 5/2/4/1, which is pretty usual for all the different Tien cards. They got very good stats. Again, has backup, which is not bad. But realistically, the effect he has when this warrior comes into play, you may move target technique card from your chi area to your hand. In that case, put a card from your hand into your chi area. In its own right, this can ensure that one particularly important technique, maybe a high cost technique, that you're only running 2 of because you don't want to overwhelm your hand with it, but you end up charging it into your chi. Well, if you manage your chi correctly and you don't use up that technique, you can get it back into your hand with Tien. Also, when you use a technique, you pay for it, and when the technique resolves, it goes into your chi area. So you can, in effect, get a 4th copy of a particular technique in your deck by running Tien. This is extremely powerful because techniques generally are very powerful. So it's worthwhile to be able to have a little bit of an extra recursion of a particular technique card. I actually run 2 copies of this Tien in a particular deck where I run Preparation for Battle. My goal in that particular deck is to be able to play a technique once during my turn, once during my opponent's turn, at least as the minimum, because every time I do that, at the end of the turn I draw a card. So Tien allows me to basically recycle a chi back into my hand and play that powerful effect, and then be able to draw a card off it as well with Preparation for Battle. If you haven't checked out that deck video, please do so. I'll leave a link in the final slide for you guys. Now, before we go into our top 3, we have some honorable mentions. These guys easily could make the top 10 list. The only reason they don't do so is because there might be another card that is just slightly better from a splash point of view, but in their own rights, these cards are probably just as powerful as those ones. I didn't want to make a top 15, top 20 list, but I did want to mention these cards as a potential replacement. Kibito Kai, an excellent card. I actually run this card in the Ginyu Force deck, and the reason being for Kibito Kai is that, again, comes down with extremely good stats, 4422. It has backup. It can give you either alien or unique chi, but if you splash it in a non-alien or non-unique deck, you still get this effect that you can discard a warrior card that shares a name with this card from your hand and put a growth coin on target warrior you control. You don't need to do anything else besides running 3 copies of this card. You could also run the set 3 Supreme Kai, you could also run the set 3 Kibito. Those also work with this effect, so technically you could have 9 cards with the same name if you really want to go absolutely ham. But you're not really going to have space for that. And anyway, remember, if you do play Kibito Kai, you can't play another Supreme Kai, you can't play another Kibito. But again, I'm often thinking about Kibito Kai as my late game card, just because he has a turn 4 cost. Again, that's a minimum cost. You can play him at turn 5, 6, 7, whatever. And if you end up having multiple copies of Kibito Kai in your hand, not a problem. Discard them. Give maybe Kibito Kai +1/+1, which is a growth coin, or maybe give one of your lead warriors +1/+1, which is again the equivalent of a growth coin. So more often than not, you will find really good utility for Kibito Kai in pretty much any deck. I also included these two guys because, well, they are often overlooked, but they are very powerful cards. First of all, we got Tian from set 2. Tian is a turn 3 villain warrior, but again, as I said with the previous Tian, Tians always have really strong stats. 4-1-4-1, look at that. Straight up line, and it has Fierce 1. And again, Fierce 1, when you win a victory, an outstanding victory, discard 1 card from the top of your opponent's deck. That is on attack, that's on defense, always good. And the same effect is on Mummy Man. Now, Mummy Man you can play a turn earlier, turn 2. Again, no chi cost as usual. 3-0, 3-0. So both these cards have Fierce 1, and both of these cards don't really care if they get damaged. They have the same effect, they have the same strength, the same stat value if they are in injure status, and obviously they get the effect of Fierce because Fierce is a valid effect. So, worthwhile trying them out? Absolutely. The only other one I would probably mention is actually the set 1 Mercenary Tau is probably just as good as the Tian. If you don't mind to lose 1 from your lead warrior, it goes from a 4-0 to a 3-0, but he also has Fierce and he also has Plunder. So he's also a fantastic card. And the final honorable mention, we have Krillin here. The previous 2 cards and Krillin didn't make the cut because we have Zangia in the deck. Zangia already has an absolutely brilliant stat line, already has Fierce 1, it's a turn 3 warrior, and basically has Krillin's effect, but Krillin's effect will affect one of your opposing warriors. Krillin will give -1/-1 to one of his opposing warriors, meaning this will only work during the action phase. And of course, the rest is the same as on Zangia, but again, Krillin has to use the technique. Whereas technically Zangia's effect is a lot more diverse, it's a lot better because you can use it on any Bojack's gang. Still, if you splash Zangia, she can target herself, so she will get the +1/+1. But if you use Krillin, and Krillin obviously still being a fantastic card, could be a very good, slightly cheaper alternative if you can't get your hands on Zangia. You're not going to get all the benefits that you will get with Zangia in terms of Bojack's gang and all that, but again, if we splash the 2 cards, Krillin is a really good alternative. And I just want to point out that amazing art that's on this card. No wonder. It's one of my favorite cards in the game. Anyway, let's look at our top 3. Top 3, we have the 2 big 0 costs, of course, Kid Goku and Zunama. Particularly Zunama end up splashing a lot when Dragon Ball coins don't really matter to my strategy. Zunama has a little bit of a drawback. When Zunama leaves play, you have to remove one Dragon Ball coin you control. That is a valid effect as well. Obviously, it has to be a valid effect. Otherwise, it wouldn't really work. But you also have Goku. Goku is a staple, of course. It is very splashable. It's very useful. You get a Saiyan. You get a Hermes style down on turn 0. It does work in many decks. So these two cards, because they don't have any specific requirements, they are very powerful turn 0 drops. They're always worthwhile considering in a deck. I would particularly highlight villain decks because villains don't have a turn 0 drop that is realistically, well, they don't have a 3-0. They have Dracula Man, which can come down as a 4-0, but from the turn after that it will be a 2-0. The other decent one to run would be Ninja Murasaki, but he's also 2-0. You have to rely on Red Ribbon support to make him a little bit better. Whereas these two guys, they're again, good standalone cards. Number 2, third form Cooler from set 5. And the main reason why this made it slightly higher than Kibiro Kai and Cooler third form is that put Kibiro Kai into honorable mentions, is because we have a little bit more utility of Cooler than what we get of Kibito. Now Cooler, mind you, being a 5-3-4-1, as long as he's in healthy status, he's still basically going to be a 5-4 as long as he's not the lead warrior of the team, because his final effect, which says other warriors in his warriors team get +1/+0. So if he's backing up a team, he's going to give your lead warrior +1/+0. In effect, he's going to act as a 5-4 card. But because that, he's also better as a lead warrior than Kibiro Kai with that +1. And he also can evolve to Cooler 4th form from set 4, which is really good. That's a very expensive card. Would normally require you 2 alien chi to be able to deploy it. But rather than deploying it, you can evolve and you still get your deployment if you can evolve it from 3rd form Cooler. He also has Fierce 1, which is, again, we talked about Fierce 1 with Tien and Mummy Man. It's a really, really good special ability to have. But also he's a bit of a search card, because when he comes into play, you can search your planet for a Cooler Force Warrior card, reveal it, and put it on top of your planet. So Cooler, the 4th form, had a slight errata. He is actually a Cooler Force card as well. But 3rd form can also search for Knees, for Dur, for our captain as well. Can't remember his name. So he can search for another copy of himself. He can search for 3 other Cooler Force Warriors, or he can search for his 4th form. The only shame is that he cannot search for a King Cold. If he could search for a King Cold, that would be fantastic. But still, don't look the gift horse in his mouth. This Cooler is still definitely very much worth the 2nd position. So what could be our number 1? Well, many of you will have guessed it. It's Dr. Wheelo. This is a bit of a trip down memory lane, but of course, those of you who are watching this, you probably have watched SSJ Future Gohan's videos as well in the past. I kind of carrying the torch that he staked in the ground. He didn't like to splash Wheelo in many of his decks at the beginning of his YouTube career, and then he eventually started to see the light on Wheelo. And indeed, splashing a villain into a deck is not a big deal. Wheelo, whilst being a turn 2 card, we often don't want to have our turn 2 card as a lead warrior. Particularly with Wheelo, though, we have to think that when we play Wheelo, we play him for the utility. Now, if you're stuck for lead warriors, then yeah, obviously you have to play Wheelo, and he is a fantastic card, and he can defend himself. When his warrior becomes user of a tool technique, you may draw a card. If you run him with Power Pole, if you're defending with him, that's when our warriors can be usually a little bit more susceptible to take damage. But you can run him with Power Pole, you actually draw 2 cards off that power pool. You draw off 1 card when you play with Wheelo and another card of the effect of power pool at the end of your turn. So you're already basically +1ing on just defending Wheelo with a power pool. And you also get Plunder on this card. You get the best acceleration effect in the game. Attack your strategy, discard a card from your hand, reveal the top 2 cards of your planet. You pick one, you put in your hand, and you pick one, you put into your G. That is the best card selection in the entire game. And then you got that valid effect where you can +1. Well, you can, if nothing else, 2 cards, when they are used by Dr. Wheelo, they replace themselves. But imagine in a tool build, like for example my Vegito deck, when we're using Potara Fusion to bring Vegito out on turn 3, Wheelo is the linchpin card for the deck. Only seconded by the set 4 GT Trunks, which also has that effect when he uses a tool card. You can draw a card at the end of your turn though, so that's nowhere near as good as Wheelo, but again, a very good budget replacement if you can't get your hands on Wheelos. So this is it, guys. We made it to our top 1. Surprise, surprise, is Dr. Wheelo. I hope you've enjoyed this list, and up until next time, guys, Saiyan signing out. Peace.